Hi, my name is Chris. I have XY chromosomes. Currently, I use they them pronouns or she her pronouns when singular they is linguistically awkward, and I consider myself gender fluid. That is to say, I do not have a consistent enough conception of my own gender to want to ascribe to any particular label. Sometimes I feel more masculine, sometimes feminine, sometimes a blend of both, and sometimes neither. How did this happen? Obviously, the answer is endlessly complex and a combination of all of my life experiences, but anime has undoubtedly played a huge role in how I've formed the identity that I have. In this video, I hope to catalog the shows that I feel have influenced me the most, as well as explain in what ways they did so. And I suppose there's nowhere better to start than the absolute beginning of my relationship with this medium. The first anime I ever watched was a show called Fruits Basket. My older sister showed it to me when I was too young to remember. I must have been around 10 years old based on the fact that this happened in the house we lived in at the time. In reality, my first anime was probably Pokemon or one of the Ghibli films that my family kept DVDs of, but Fruits Basket was the first that I had contextualized as something different from the cartoons I was used to. The Danny Phantoms, the Scooby-Doos, the Phineas and Ferbs. I don't even particularly remember liking Fruits Basket, and after rewatching the show, I still don't, but I do find it a fascinating piece of my history with the medium. Just for a bit of context, Fruits Basket is about this girl named Toru Honda who begins the show living in a tent as a result of a family tragedy. A group of 3 boys decide to take her in, and they have a sort of curse placed upon them as a result of being part of the Zodiac family, which results in each of them turning into one of the many animals on the Zodiac calendar whenever they are touched by someone of the opposite sex. Hijinks and melodrama ensues. Here was a show that had a particular style of comedy, a particular flow of conversation that I had never seen before. It didn't look like anything I'd previously seen, and it certainly took itself a little more seriously. It felt a little more adult than anything I'd been exposed to. If you've seen Fruits Basket, then it shouldn't surprise you that I wouldn't quite call it mature nowadays, but I think it says something about what this show meant and still means to me that it was the first time I ever heard someone in an animated television show say, "What the hell?" I remember my mom walking into the room right when that line was spoken and being terrified that we had been caught watching something we weren't supposed to. I was interested, and so I sought out more shows that reminded me of Fruits Basket, and as much as I would go on to become obsessed with anime that was targeted at young boys, Fairy Tail, Attack on Titan, Sword Art Online, I don't think that first experience with this new type of television ever really left me. While I would later on be the type of person to heavily project myself onto the main characters of all the shows I just listed, these male power fantasies about being the hero, the one who saves the day, the fact of the matter is that my introduction to this medium was through the perspective of Honda Toru, a soft, kind-hearted schoolgirl. Not quite the macho take action and get shit done protagonists I would later become exposed to. In fact, Toru most often seeks to de-escalate tension between the other characters, taking on the role of the peacekeeper. This is going to be a running theme throughout this video, but I can't say for sure which aspects of my identity connected with media I've watched and which ones were literally created by media I've watched. I bring this up because I've seen myself as the peacekeeper of my family for about as long as I can remember. Having witnessed and yet rarely being involved in no shortage of arguments and conflicts within the household, I naturally found myself empathizing with both parties. It also helps that when you live with people your whole life, you tend to get a pretty good grasp of where their values are and the way that they express ideas that they are trying to communicate. And as such, I often found myself trying to bridge the gap between everyone's perspectives. While I don't think this personality trait came straight from Fruits Basket, I have no doubt that it at least further encouraged me to become more emotionally intelligent, as well as place value on resolving people's misunderstandings of one another, even if I didn't consciously recognize this at the time. And as no shortage of you have probably noticed by now, this was me, a still developing little boy, relating to a female character by way of learning values that are traditionally more feminine in nature. And if I hadn't already been inundated with the way our society ascribes genders to different behaviors, Fruits Basket definitely made sure I was, taking no shortage of opportunities to reinforce male and female stereotypes throughout the story. Around this time, my sister also would have introduced me to Ouran High School Host Club, and I'm sure it did also color my perception of what is normal for a main character in anime to be like. Yet again, this is an example of a main character / audience surrogate who is a girl, and in this case one who dresses as a boy at that. For whatever reason though, I wasn't as interested in Host Club. Not that I cared though, because I had already begun branching out and discovering many more anime on my own. A year or two later, I would stumble across Soul Eater, which would single-handedly shape many of my aesthetic sensibilities and ones that have persisted in me to this day. And while I wouldn't quite call it a favorite of mine, I'd be hard-pressed to say that this hasn't been one of the most influential anime I've ever watched. Soul Eater also happens to be much more well-known than Fruits Basket, but for the uninitiated, it is a show about a group of students attending the Death Weapon Meister Academy, or DWMA. Students here are categorized into two groups: weapons, who are able to transform their bodies into weapons, and Meisters, who wield said weapons. Obviously there's more to it than that, but that's not important for this video. And everyone's goal is basically to level up the weapons by killing and eating the souls of these demon-esque people up to the point where they become death scythes, which means that they are personally used by the founder of the DWMA, Lord Death himself, who is a Shinigami. Along its run, we meet a wealth of unique and entertaining characters, but standing out among them in my eyes was this skinny little pink-haired kid named Crona. Now, Crona is a fantastic character in their own right, but what's obviously important for the sake of this video is that they are androgynous. And this was a characteristic that I had never encountered before. From the first moment that Crona showed up on screen, I was entirely fascinated with them because I couldn't fit them into a definitively male or female box. And this was, of course, at an age when I hadn't really conceived of the idea of androgyny, let alone gender as a separate characteristic than sex. Like I said, by this point in my life, I had already picked up on what are traditionally male and female gender roles, and I very much used them as a heuristic to gauge certain aspects of the characters I saw on TV, as well as the real-life people that I interacted with. But I couldn't do that with Crona. I couldn't confidently make assumptions about the type of person they were based on what sex I perceived them to be, and as such, I think I paid more attention to the individual actions that they take and behaviors they exhibit throughout the show. That way I could put together a mental understanding of this character. And again, I definitely was not consciously aware of any of this stuff going on in my brain, but rather I am inferring how this show and this character affected me based on the reactions I remember having to them and making connections to the way that I act now. In Crona's specific case, I think that I internalized the way that I couldn't really fit them into a box like I could the other characters, and how that caused me to think of them as a more individual person, because that is what I want for myself now. Part of why I currently identify as gender fluid is because I want people to view me the way I viewed Crona. I don't want people to place me into a box and make assumptions about the type of person I am. I want them to gradually construct a holistic image of my personality and mannerisms by observing the things that I say and the way that I present myself. Crona may also be why I feel like that is kind of the whole purpose of gender. It's a heuristic that allows us as individuals to efficiently communicate information about ourselves to others, as well as efficiently gather that same type of information about other people. And in this way, I don't think that the existence of gender stereotypes is necessarily a bad thing. They very much can be harmful in many situations, but they do also serve a valuable social function. And I think that adjusting our own identities to better reflect what stereotypes we feel are accurate to us would be a good way to better take advantage of that system. And I think it makes sense that this worldview about how gender should be used as an expressive tool may have been particularly informed by Soul Eater, because so much of my expressive tendencies draw influence from it. I remember seriously wanting to dress up as Maka Alburn for Halloween one year. I'm never going to stop thinking that holding pistols upside down is objectively the coolest way to use the weapon, and I'd be willing to bet that my fixation on the color pink has direct roots in my fascination with Crona themselves. Watching Soul Eater is definitely a memory I can recall with more detail than Fruits Basket, a result of having watched it more recently, and so it makes sense that I would have more specific parallels to draw between what I witnessed in it and the type of person I would later become. However, I once again must point out that at the time I hadn't consciously processed any of this. In fact, in the years following, as I entered high school, I began questioning my gender among a myriad of other things about myself while still maintaining my interest in anime without ever considering that maybe the fact I wanted to look like basically every character I saw on screen might have said something about how the medium had influenced me. Fruits Basket may have planted the seeds of general personality traits and conceptualizations of normality in my psyche, and Soul Eater may have provided me with more specific aesthetic interests, but if there were a show that made me consciously realize the effect that they and other media had on me, as well as what to do with that newfound knowledge, it would be Neon Genesis Evangelion. And at this point, we have to fast forward to the far-off year of 2020. I'd just finished up my junior year of high school, lockdown had been in effect for a few months, and at this point, I felt pretty confident in calling myself gender fluid. And I had been meaning to watch Evangelion for quite a long time due to its prestige for being one of, if not the most influential anime of all time. This is a show that needs no introduction, especially if you know enough about the anime landscape to be familiar with the previous two shows I discussed. But just to quickly cover all my bases, 14-year-old Shinji Ikari is summoned by his emotionally distant father Gendo to pilot a giant robot which he uses to protect Japan from the giant aliens that repeatedly show up to destroy humanity. There are plenty of other characters, each of which have their own emotional baggage tied to their place in the narrative, as well as many secrets about NERV, the organization Gendo runs to progress his plans to save the world, which are yet to be discovered. And fair warning, I will be discussing the ending of the show as it is pretty critical to the conceit of this video. I will try not to give too many details as I do think this is a fantastic show, but still, spoiler warning. The last two episodes of Evangelion are a complete departure from the plot of the show prior. In this time, the show psychologically explores Shinji, his personal issues, and how those issues are affecting his relationships with the characters he has grown close to throughout the course of the series. And a main sticking point here is in getting Shinji to understand that the version of all of his friends that he perceives is different from the perceptions that other people have towards them. And by extension, that the person he perceives himself to be is different from the person everyone else perceives him to be. And this was a message that hit me very hard. And that's not just me being pretentious like, oh, this show had such a profound influence on me. No, I literally just paced around my house at like 1 AM thinking about what I just watched, then decided to bike around my neighborhood just so that I could look up at the sky and contemplate life. Point is, I am not exaggerating when I say that this show had a massive impact on me. I've always been a pretty naturally extroverted person. That meme about how introverts make friends is exactly how I've made most of my friends that I have today. I had always found that expressing myself and not caring about what others thought of me came naturally. Two things that could not describe Shinji Ikari less. And so, when I powerfully connected to his struggles, and specifically his revelation at the end of the TV series, I felt the need to take a step back and consider why. What I realized was that although I had gotten to a place in life where I felt more confident in my gender identity, among other things, but we're focusing on gender, I had not yet begun expressing that side of myself to other people. Not necessarily that I had been dishonest, but that I felt like many of the people who knew me didn't know the full me. And remember, this was in the middle of lockdown, a time in which I was effectively cut off from the rest of society and thus had no real means of expressing myself to the real world. So naturally, I turned to the internet. I leaned even harder onto the web as an outlet for that expression. I began seeking out more media about queer characters. I got more public with my pronoun usage. I made the avatar that I currently use. It's quite odd that a show basically about trying to get its main character to man up was the show that drew back the curtain on most of the stuff I've been dissecting in this video. And I think that's why I enjoyed this ending so much and still enjoy it to this day despite the extremely low budget. I had vaguely heard about the last episodes being a clusterfuck and not living up to the rest of the show, but upon watching it, I resonated so strongly with the psychological exploration of Shinji's mind and the conclusions that the show comes to regarding his issues, that I found extreme value and enjoyment from the show literally just explaining to me its message. In the years since watching Eva, after coming out to friends and beginning to express myself a bit more femininely, I naturally started relating more and more to the queer characters I saw in media. Chief among them, and most recently being Momoe Sawaki from Wonder Egg Priority. When the first episode of Wonder Egg Priority dropped at the beginning of this year and began receiving a massive amount of attention for being weird as shit, I knew that I had to at least check it out. Thankfully, however, I waited, knowing that this probably wasn't the type of show that I would want to watch weekly. And luckily, I decided to watch the show right in time for the special episode to drop, coinciding with my viewing of episode 12. What I thought to be the final episode of the show for about an hour after watching it before I just decided to Google it. So basically, I watched this show at whatever pace I felt like and still got to witness the community reaction to the finale firsthand. In fact, I made a whole video about my reaction to the community reaction, which you owe it to yourself to check out if you haven't already. Wonder Egg Priority is about a group of girls, each of which knew someone who committed suicide. With the expectation that it will bring said person back to life, they each take on the job of protecting and helping the spirits of other girls who committed suicide whilst in a sort of dream world that basically seems like limbo, where the trauma and emotional issues issues that drove the suicide victims to take their lives manifest into physical, abstracted, often monstrous creatures for the main characters to destroy. And if it wasn't already obvious, they too have quite a few issues of their own to sort out. By virtue of Wonder Egg's premise alone, it was likely to resonate with me on some level. There are infinite possible reasons one might have for taking their own life, so I was likely to relate to at least one of them. And boy howdy did I, because you guessed it, one of the main characters, Momoe Sawaki, is a trans girl. Now, I wouldn't say that I have gender dysphoria or body dysmorphia. It would certainly be nice to have a body and voice that were more androgynous, that way I could more easily pass as whatever gender I wanted, but I don't find this to be a constant weight on my mind, nor something that affects a disproportionately large amount of my day-to-day interactions and experiences. Still, I can very easily relate to a character who is far more dissatisfied with their appearance, and that's where Momoe connects with me. She basically struggles with the most condensed, hyper-dramatic versions of issues that I can relate to, and the stance that Wonder Egg Priority takes on them is unlike anything I have ever seen before, not just in anime, but any piece of professional media ever. And it pretty much encapsulates exactly what I want more of from trans stories and even just minority stories on the whole. Momoe Sawaki is the most genuine, validating presentation of a trans woman that I've ever seen. The show doesn't call her a boy who acts like a girl, or a girl who used to be a boy, as I'd expect from most shows, especially anime. The show describes her as a girl who is sometimes mistaken for a boy. That's it. It's a description that you could easily believe is describing a cisgendered woman, which is the point. Unless you're discussing something that is meaningfully informed by knowing someone's chromosomes, there should be no functional difference between the way that we think about trans people versus cis people. And in Wonder Egg Priority, never is it even slightly suggested by anyone that Momoe is not a perfectly and completely valid female, with the exception of the monsters that are literally abstractions of trauma and people that have wronged her or the people she's protecting. Wonder Egg opens a window into a world where pretty much everyone is just okay with and understanding of trans people. Obviously, it's not a world where people can just magically tell what your pronouns are the first time they meet you, nor is it one where the inherent struggles that come from that kind of reasonable misunderstanding don't exist. But within its relevant characters, it doesn't even consider the possibility that anyone wouldn't just think of Momoe as a girl, with zero pushback whatsoever, which is something I was not expecting at all. Not to get too preachy, but I think it says something that when I heard the show describe Momoe as a girl that gets mistaken for a boy, and when I found out that the Egg Protectors, the group Momoe is a part of, is strictly for girls, and when I learned about Momoe going to an all-girls school, I actually started to doubt that she was really a trans woman, because for those things to all be the case while her still having XY chromosomes, that would mean that her Japanese parents would have to have been okay with her transitioning, and that the show didn't see any meaningful difference between her and any other random girl with zero consideration for biology. And I didn't think that was possible. I've become so used to how a lot of shows, especially in the West, have this sort of metatextual insistence on its own queerness. Like, a show will try to completely make sure that you know that one of its characters is queer, and that's not inherently a bad thing, but I think that, at least for me, it sort of conditioned me to believe that every character I saw on screen was straight and cis unless the show went out of its way to tell me otherwise. As a result, I actually doubted Wonder Egg's sincerity about everything I just discussed related to Momoe until episode 10, when they just straight up put Momoe in a trans jacket. It was like the show was telling me, look how stupid you are for needing us to beat you over the head with the point before you actually felt confident in believing what should have been obvious from the first scene that this character was present in. And what's so awesome about that scene is that despite being blatant as hell, the attention drawn towards Momoe being trans is actually perfectly organic. The person who she was protecting was a trans man and committed suicide because of an issue that was very much tied to him being trans. All of this amounts to Wonder Egg Priority, and specifically Momoe, being one of, if not the most believable depictions of a trans person I've ever seen in fictional media, which is why I find this show to be so gender validating. If Evangelion taught me that I needed to take action to get people to see me the way I wanted to see myself, Wonder Egg Priority reminded me that there is no way to fail at expressing your gender, and that if someone isn't able to accept me for who I am, that doesn't have to be my problem. So, where does that leave me? It's weird to say that Land of the Lustrous is part of my gender journey with anime because unlike the other shows I've discussed, I don't feel like it had much of an influence on me. In fact, it's completely possible that if I were to have made this video a few years or even a few months down the line, I wouldn't have even mentioned Land of the Lustrous in it. However, I think that my time watching this show has been a very good demonstration of where I'm most currently at in terms of the way I consume stories that relate to the queer experience. And this is because Land of the Lustrous isn't even about anything specifically queer, and yet I am able to find it compelling through the lens of my own gender identity. It also probably helps that the characters just so happen to all be agendered. Land of the Lustrous follows a group of sentient gemstones who are seemingly valuable to a group of golden aliens called the Lunarians, by account of the fact that they consistently come down from the moon in an attempt to break and collect our protagonists. The issues that Phosphophilite, our main character, deals with throughout the 12 episodes of the anime, those being a struggle to form identity, struggle to form self-worth, and struggle to truly understand the intentions and needs of others, are nothing inherent nor specific to the queer experience. However, an LGBTQIA+ audience member is likely to find the themes of this show quite applicable in their own experience being queer, which is exactly how I felt. I was primarily able to connect to Foss because of my experience in exploring my own identity. For example, when I saw how Foss progressively replaces parts of their body, thus changing their personality, I related to how I didn't know how to feel about no longer thinking of myself as male. I'm effectively becoming a new person than I was just a few years ago, and just as Foss's new limbs allow them to accomplish tasks that they were utterly useless at previously, making this change in myself certainly has its benefits. But is it purely a good thing? I can't say for sure. And I think this speaks to how I've evolved in terms of my media consumption. I now have a completely new way to relate my own life to the lives of the characters I view both in anime and in all artistic mediums. Another tool in my toolkit for understanding and contextualizing art in the future. Obviously though, the future is something I cannot discuss in this video, and I dare not even predict where I might end up simply because of how unlikely I will be to be correct. Having just become a legal adult and about to move off to another state for university, it would be an understatement to say that I'm about to experience a lot of big changes, which will undoubtedly shape the type of person I become. But whatever's in store for me, I welcome it. Whether I end up going completely trans female, sticking with gender fluid, or identifying as the fourth ring of Saturn, I can't wait to find out. And if you want to encourage me to keep making videos throughout the upcoming chaos that will soon be introduced into my life, I'd appreciate it if you donated to my Patreon. Or hey, subscribing and hitting the bell is free. The music you've been hearing throughout this video comes from amazing synth musician and good friend of mine, Select, who you should all go check out. He deserves so much more attention. Truly, thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.